Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Study Chronicles. Today I'm going to be going over the cutoff versus the big blind from the big blind's perspective. Last episode we looked at the cutoff strategy. We're going to dive into the pre-flop ranges, and then we're going to start doing some drills so that we can naturally study some scenarios that occur. So let me take a look at GTO Wizard. Here we go. And you can see that GTO Wizard is now being festive with the ghosts for Halloween coming up. Fun little added UI there. So we're going to go and look at the big blind defense versus cutoff open. As always, we have 500 general GTO ranges. Opening 2.3x from the cutoff. So the big blind defense is unique in that it's the largest 3-bet size that we use out of position. You'll notice that when we're big blind versus button, it's 13, and then the cutoff is 13. Against the cutoff is 13.5. Why that is, I can't say exactly. I just thought last episode we talked about that the threshold from the ranges loosening up a lot are in the cutoff. So if you look at the hijack, you'll see that we're still raising at 21.5% frequency. And then once you get to the cutoff, it jumps all the way up to 30, which is a big gap, because if you look at the gap between under the gun and hijack, it's only about a 3% difference. And then when you go to the cutoff, not only is it a large gap, but also we're raising a larger sizing and it's a larger gap. So to show you guys something, if you look at the 2.5x ranges, you'll see the gap is maybe a little different in terms of how often each position is going to open. But there are, when you play around with the sizings, you're going to get different results. You're going to get different solutions. So whatever GTO Wizard did for their parameters, they figured that the 13.5 was just a better sizing to use than a 12 big blind 3-bet. The EV was just probably higher or in a sweet spot at 13.5. So typically whenever GTO Wizard comes out with ranges or solutions, I don't really question them too much, because I know how much research they do in order to find those answers. General 100, there we go. And so I have a healthy amount of trust in their process for coming up with the different sizings they use and everything like that. If you wanted to look deep into what their sizings are and why they got those sizings, you can see some different custom solutions that they've used over the past to find the sizings that they use. So if you wanted to look deeper into that, that's an option. Let me see if I can find where they are. I think they're like complex. I think they're the complex ranges. And then when you look through the complex ranges, you'll find that you'll see like 5 different sizings, or like 50 different sizings or something. What is it? Yeah, here you go. So like in a 3-bet pot, you see, and now all of a sudden it's just got like something like 15, 20 sizings to use. And so they go through all of these scenarios with the complex solution and see which sizings the solver is going to use the most, and they continue to find what the optimal sizings are. So you can see here, for example, if there's a 0% frequency of 138 and larger, they just get rid of all of that, probably, right? All right, going back to the scenario that we're studying today. So 13.5 is our 3-bet sizing. I was just trying to give you background on that, because I get the question a lot, like, why do I use such a large sizing out of the big blind? And it's because I follow most of what the GTO Wizard guys have put together for the solutions for preflop, because of their process is something that I trust and feel comfortable using. Some players use, a 10 big blind 3-bet. That's going to change, the construction of not only your 3-betting range, but your calling range as well. Depending on what sizing you use, it's important to take note on how that makes an impact on your range, right? Typically, the larger you go, the more polarized you're going to see your range become, and the smaller you go, the more linear your range is going to be. So, if you are going to use smaller 3-bets, you're going to see more of a high frequency of these suited broadways than if you use a really large 3-bet. You might see some weaker pairs more often, like 9s and 8s maybe. But again, you can also check in the solutions library for a small 3-bet size. They have that included in their sims as well. I think it might be under, it's under one of these categories here. But yeah, you can definitely go through and check out how those 3-bet sizings affect the construction. Okay. And then our calling range. Oh, here, let me take this off the general. There we go. And then the calling range, we're going to have offsuit aces at a mix. We have some aggressive 3-bets with ace 5 and ace 4 offsuit. Our suited combos are going to be jack 3 at the worst, 9 5. These 2 gap combos like 8 5 7 4 6 3 5 2. You have every single pocket pair, and 5s and 4s are going to be where you're going to mix some of the 3-betting. And then 8s is interestingly kind of in this middling category where it has a lot of equity as a call and prefers to play more as a call than a 3-bet. 5s are a little bit weaker, but still, can be majority of a call. Let me finish my coffee. Still got to wake up. All right. And then, yeah, offsuit broadways are all going to be mixing a 3-bet aggressively. So you can see like aggressively 3-betting a lot of different combos here against the cutoff. And then the thing that we're going to lack the most is jacks plus, ace king, suited, ace queen. Kind of like this little arrow, right? This little arrowhead of value. Whenever that's missing, you can assume that certain textures are going to really favor the in-position raiser. All right. That being said, let's get into the drills. So we have cutoff versus big blinds. Hero is in the big blinds. And the first thing I'm going to mention is that we looked at leading ranges in the last videos, and we noticed a trend that under the gun is going to be leading, big blind versus under the gun is going to be leading less than big blind versus the button. So the later positions that you're defending against as the big blind, the more you're going to have a leading frequency on the certain textures that are good for leading. So for the most part, we are going to check. King, Queen, 7 is an easy pure check. Facing an overbet, easy decision. One thing I've noticed in position in these single raise pots is I've been under overbetting. So I think I need to incorporate more overbets into that. Yeah. Yes, we are going to look at aggregated reports once we find the first scenario for facing a bet, perhaps. This one's going to be an easy folds. Don't have much equity, don't need to float ace high. And this one is probably going to, yeah. So now we're going to look at the aggregated reports, because what do we do out of position facing a large bet? This is something that I always like to look at. As you guys know, the aggregated reports are going to give us the bird's eye view of our strategy. So facing a bet, we can look through here. So this is going to be very similar to the big blind versus the button scenarios that we were looking at, right? We're going to see a tendency of using 150 as a raise size versus a bet. So if we look at the big blind facing the 75% bet, we're likely going to use the 50% more often than the 100%. And then if we face the 33%, we'll see the 100% frequency go up. Along with the 50%, because you're just going to be check raising more often. You're getting a better price here when villain is betting small, and then when villain's betting large, they're going to have a more narrow range. It's going to be more polarized. We're not getting as great of a price to check raise, so our range tightens up a bit. And so yeah, so against the 75. We're going to be raising about a total of 8%, folding 53, and then versus the small sizing, you see we're majority going to call with a mix of raise. But it is important to note that you're folding a majority of the time facing the larger sizing. So it's kind of like the threshold for deciding what you're going to do. So if you're kind of stuck between, oh, this is maybe close call, maybe this is a close fold, and they use the larger sizing, that's a good time to fold. But if you're like, oh, maybe I should call, maybe I should fold, and they're using the small sizing, that's probably a time to call. I make that decision. So what do we do with top pair here? 10-3-2. I think most of the time, I'm just going to call. Maybe we can have a small frequency raise. We'd rather raise something a little stronger, something like ace 10, king 10. But I have seen in the past, the solver likes to balance check raising some top pairs here, because when we do have draws and we check raise the flop and then the draw misses, it's important to have some strong hands that we can also check with. So if we have something like 10-9 or jack 10 or queen 10, this isn't really a check raise for value on the flop, but it's more so to have some balance within our check raise range on this flop. Like, sure, we can deny some equity from like 2 overs with clubs or something like that have to fold, and some good things can come from check raising top pair, but it's also so that we're balancing our entire range moving forward. And so that once we check raise the flop, we need some check calls on the turn, and those hands fit in very well. So I have seen the solver check raise some mediocre top pairs in spots. However, I typically am going to just call here versus the large bet. So we check, call, turn, we're going to check. So villain uses a non-overbet sizing, which means I'm probably not going to fold top pair. Maybe the weakest top pair, like 10-7 of clubs or something, but I don't think I get to fold jack 10. And you can see here that we're even sometimes raising the turn. Now, I think this has the same logic as what I was talking about on the flop. Where we get some protection by check raising the turn. We're going to be more balanced on rivers on a double flush draw turn where we have a lot of semi bluffs. Now we have some value that can check call river. But I think most of the time I'm just going to check call. And then on the river, the 9 comes in, and villain shows ace jack. So interesting spot where ace jack is turned into a bluff, maybe for future, bluffing equity with the ace of spades. If a spade comes in, it's a good hand to turn into a bluff. Has okay equity when called on the turn, because we're going to sometimes have some weaker ace high flushes in hearts, or maybe we check call some like queen jack of hearts that we floated the flop with sometimes that we don't check raise, etc., etc. So doesn't bluff the river, but does put in a bet on turn and maybe bluff certain spade rivers or something like that. King jack 7. This is going to be a check, and then if villain does bet, I think this is okay. So they used an overbet sizing again. I don't think we have a raise very often here. Typically, when you face an overbet, the most common thing by far is just to call with most of your range, because obviously cutoff is going to be polarized. You don't want them to fold out the weaker parts of their range when you have those medium strength hands that are ahead of the weak hands but behind the strong hands. You just go into bluff catching mode. So I am going to call here, but it wouldn't surprise me if I do still build a check raise range, because we have some of the top end value. We do have a frequency of pocket jacks. I think, or was pocket jacks just pure folding? Let's see. I think that's going to be important in our strategy here. So cutoff versus the big blind. Okay, so jacks is a pure 3-bet, which means king jack board textures. It makes more sense to overbet those at a higher frequency because king jack is effectively like an ace king board in that big blind's not going to have aces or kings. Big blind's not going to have kings or jacks in this scenario. So facing an overbet, we're just going to call. We do see a little bit of this raise. We still have hands like king jack, pocket sevens, king seven suited that perhaps can go into this range. Also hands like queen 10 of spades, which have a lot of equity, right? Combo draws like the one I have here have a lot of equity. Once the top card pairs, now if villain had used a large sizing or a small sizing, I think we could see some leads. Maybe we can still see some leads against an overbet, but in general, I don't think we're leading the turn very much versus an overbet. Okay, we are. I was wondering because there's some theory here that when villain does overbet, our continuing range is going to be a lot tighter than if villain uses like the smaller sizing. So in fact, it might be the opposite of what I was saying. It might be the case that we're leading more often when the top card pairs after calling an overbet because our range is so narrow and top pair heavy. I think the best hands advantage might even shift over to our favor. So looking at, what sizing villain uses for c-betting and then seeing how that impacts our range on the turn card is very important. So you can see we have a bunch of leading now, and we look at the ranges, and you can see that in fact the best hands does transfer over to the big blind here, whereas I think pre-flop or on the flop, the best hands advantage would have been very much so in the cutoff's favor. So after the overbet, our continuing range is so narrow that we now just have primarily a lot of best hands and a lot of trash hands because a lot of our floated flush draws are going to obviously lose a lot of equity on a pair turn. So yeah, we have now kind of a polarized range. So you start to see a little bit of a lead from the big blind on the top card pairing. I think you'll also see this with the jack pairing as well. Maybe to a little bit of a lesser extent, but we still have a big lead frequency with the medium card, and then maybe the bottom card. Not strong enough. Not enough bottom card combos that we can call the flop with that we want to be leading the turn with. But in general, just think about, okay, what's my range for continuing? Now, what do I have on this turn? Any brick turn, we're never going to lead, right? So like a 2, I'm pretty sure we're just always checking everything other than those paired cards where a majority of our range becomes better. So we can also just use the reports. We can use the reports to look at some of these turns. So you can see here, we're going to be leading some spade X combos. Like 9x and 6x. So you can see here in the strategy that if this was like a 6 of spades, we're going to have some leads. And that's because calling an overbet, we're going to have a lot of strong spade draws. This is something I don't think a lot of players are doing enough of, including myself. I'm not leading the turn enough on spade turns. King turns, maybe something, mostly just a spade or a king, like a 9 turn brings in a lot of straight combos. We can lead those. So it's just interesting to look at how our strategy changes versus those larger sizings. So once it goes check, check, I don't think we have value. I don't think block betting makes a lot of sense unless, they have to call ace queen or they have to call something like ace 10. I don't think they're going to have to do that very often. So this to me is probably just a check, maybe a 20%. Okay, I was going to say maybe a 20% sizing because it's one of those things where like if they do have to call ace queen ever, or they have like 7-6 or whatever, maybe they have pocket 8s that have to fold. Let's dive into this real quick because I'm curious to see why we're betting small on the river. It's hard to find equity shifting turn donks, yes. But typically the equity shifting turns are going to be the ones that make something like a draw, like a flush draw comes in or a straight comes in. Those are the most intuitive ones. And then top pair and middle card pairing are basically, that's basically it for turn leading. There isn't too many other combos that you're going to lead, unless it's a very unique configuration where like you check call out of the small blind versus the big blind on a 6-high board and an ace hits the turn, right? Where that hits all of our floated ace highs out of position. So like there's a lot of scenarios where you can lead as long as it increases, as long as the turn increases your equity, it makes sense to lead. Okay, so what were we looking at? Oh, why is it 20%? So if we do bet this 20% sizing, what hands is cutoff going to call that we get value from? Because typically if you see a block bet, it's not just because you're doing it because you don't want to face a bet. You're doing it because you're going to get value from hands. So looking at their hands that they have to call here, it looks like they do in fact have to call ace queen. So we're going to get value from that. They do have to call ace 10. They're calling a lot of ace high here, surprisingly. If we look at the filters, we can see ace high. Yeah, they're calling a lot of ace high here. And worse than 7x. So you see here, we're getting called by all of these different combos, 5s down to 2s, 6s, ace highs. All of these are going to have to call versus us. And then we're chopping with all of these 7s, I think, except for ace 7, of course. No, we're beating the 7s. Yeah, because we have a better kicker. So we're beating 10-7, 9-7, and 8-7. 7-6. Okay. That's surprising. I didn't think I would see as much value in block betting there as we have. And then there you go. Villain shows up with a pair of 5s, which they might have called versus the small bet. Pretty cool, huh? That being said, what hands are we bluffing here, right? Like what hands are we calling the flop with an overbet, checking the turn, and then leading the river? It looks like some missed spade draws. So the worst parts of our spade draws, some of our straight draws. Oh, sorry, did I say straight draws twice? Flush draws, I meant, and then straight draws. Over here, queen highs with spades. Yeah, so basically our missed spades or our missed straight draws that are less showdown heavy. So like non-ace high ones are going to be our bluffs. Okay, next hand, Jack, Jack 8, going to pure check here. This is a spot where we can check raise half pot. I don't think we're going to use 100% that much, but I rolled a 1, which is very aggressive. So maybe we do in this scenario. I'm going to go with the 50 just because I know it's a safe raise. Yeah. We're not going to use the 100 on the paired boards. Jack 10, 9, pure check. Gonna just pure check fold. Simple hand. 10, 5, 3 rainbow out of the big blind. Don't think we're leading. This is a spot where I always am not sure. I think this is a good continue with 2 overs to the 10. But I am always uncomfortable with like defending hands like this because I'm not sure if I'm supposed to raise or if I'm supposed to call or if it's a frequency or what, but I still think I can fold here versus the half pot sizing. Remember when I said if you're stuck between is this a call or is this a fold and villain goes large, then you can make the fold more often. And if it's the small sizing, then you should be calling more often. Well, they just use the medium sizing. So that makes me still unsure of what to do, right? I'm going to call here. But yeah, see, this is indifferent. Anytime I get into these indifferent spots, I find like my brain just goes back and forth until maybe I re-roll an RNG or something like that. Or that's when I roll an RNG if I'm really unsure. But yeah, so the principle does still stand, folding probably more often versus the medium sizing than versus the small sizing. But calling is still okay. Is this ace a card we want to ever lead? 4-2. So ace makes the 4-2 straight. We have some ace high floats like ace 4, ace 3, ace 2, ace 5, ace 10, all of these combos that interact with an ace, but I don't think we want to lead. Yeah, I think we'd rather lead like a 6 or a 4, something a little bit more obvious for straights. Now that we get to the river with queen high, I think this is going to be a pure bluff. This has to be, actually, let me take that back. Maybe not a pure bluff, because we do have 6-4, 7-6 that missed. Those might take priority in bluffing. But queen jack does have good blocking properties in blocking queens, blocking jacks, blocking ace queen or ace jack that they might have checked back, blocking jack 10 suited that they might have checked back. So I am going to bluff this one. I think the sizing is going to be 60%. Okay, so yeah, we do see some even more aggressive bluffs here with overbetting 130 or overbetting 300%. So yes, good hand to bluff for all the reasons I just mentioned. And it looks like we're going more aggressive than I would have thought. So actually, I'm going to make a note here because this is something I think I've been lacking. I've been lacking the larger aggressive bets in spots like that. So let me open up our notes so we can look at the big blinds. And then we have not using larger sizings after bet call, check, check, and then question mark. Check, bet, call, check, check, and then question mark. I hope that's kind of easy to follow. Makes sense to me. Maybe I can figure out a better way of writing down the shorthand for the action that happens, because it's important to understand, you know, what node you're looking at, because the difference between the strategy of leading the turn and leading the river is huge. Okay. All right, next hand, ace king 2. Gonna pure, nope, not gonna pure check. We have a lead here, which might surprise myself and some of you, but leading ace high suited combos, ace high suited monotone board, sorry, is good because we have all of the weak suited queens and villain doesn't, right? Cutoff is going to open queen 5 suited at the worst, whereas we're going to be defending queen deuce suited all the way up. As well as all of the weak jack X suited combos that cutoff's not going to open. So we're going to be defending hands like jack 4 suited, where cutoff is not going to have those hands. So let's just double check that here. So yeah, we have as worse as jack 3 suited. So because we have all of these suited combos in our calling range, we're going to be able to lead ace high board textures. If the board was a king high flush, then it's a little different because the cutoff is going to still have a lot of suited aces in their range. But because cutoff lacks these hands here, the ace high boards don't matter when they have these hands. It matters that they have these and these, right? So we see some leading from the big blind on specifically the ace high monotone boards. Once we check, gonna just check call. I don't know if we want to check raise, but I imagine not. It's like a very specific medium type of hand. Gonna check turn. Facing a bet, going to probably just call here, facing the medium size. This is pretty far up in our range, but you do see the solver start to fold without a spade in hand. So even though we have a really strong top pair, it's relatively not that good, right? Because there's a flush out there. Anytime there's a flush out there, top pair immediately loses a ton of equity. And so you can see how important it is out of position to actually have some kind of extra equity with that spade or blocker. So we call, river's a jack. I think we're going to check. Goes check, check, and they have ace king. Okay, next hand, 7-4-2. This is a texture we can lead. But something we learned about leading is that when we have these clubs or diamonds combos, I think it's a pure check. That being said, we do have backdoor straights with the 6. So let's take a risk and lead small here because of the backdoor straight draws. Damn, still wrong. Okay. But I do think we would see some leads from any other combos that have either hearts or obviously spades. Once we lead, I'm going to check the turn. That's a bad turn. And then once we get to the river, we're not supposed to have this hand for leading, so I could see this being just a check on the river. Nope. Looks like the solver does want to turn it into a bluff if we did lead the flop. And that's just because we have 9 high, no showdown value. We have some removal effects with like, you know, pocket 6s, pocket 9s, 9-10, 9-7 suited is relevant there. 6-7 suited is relevant there. And I thought there's a piece of theory where when you get to the river with hands you weren't supposed to do something with, you typically just don't play them as aggressive. That being said, this one wasn't necessarily a blunder for leading the flop. So perhaps we were, wrong about that assumption. It was just an inaccuracy. Inaccuracies and blunders are different, by the way. This is a blunder here. This is an inaccuracy here. And you can see that by the yellow and the red if you didn't already know. But yellow is going to include that hand at a small percentage of the time. So you can see it's a 0.5%. So it's included in the solution. Whereas if you see something that's a 0%, that's literally not in the solution, and the solver can't look at that scenario. All right, just gonna get rid of this hand. So yeah, so that was an inaccuracy for leading the flop. 8-5 of diamonds, queen jack 7. So yeah, so that just doubles down on the fact that if we do have the non-flush draw or the backdoor flush with our hand, it's likely going to mostly be a check instead of a lead, even if we do have a global lead frequency of like 30 or 40%. Check, 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 check. Don't think this is interesting unless the river comes off something unexpected. Queen 8-7, this is going to be a mixed check raise if they do bet. If they check, we now turn a pair. This is actually an interesting spot that I need to look at more often because I'm always torn between what sizing to use on this turn. So if we didn't have a made hand right now, like let's say we had king 5 of spades, like what sizing I should use, right? I think we can use all of the sizings in our strategy because there's different parts of our range that want to bet small. There's different parts of our range that want to bet medium. And then there's definitely parts of our range that we want to overbet or large bet, because there's just a really wide range getting to the turn from the big blind. And we have all of those categories. Whereas let's say it was a different type of range where we were defending super tight out of the big blind, then maybe we would only have a couple of sizings because that range is going to have a big interaction with a certain, 6 turn, and then we only use the large sizing or something like that. But because we have such a wide range, a lot of different categories, I think we're going to have all 4 sizings. So let's take a look more in depth at what we're going to do. And it looks like we do, in fact, have all 4 sizings. Even added 250 and 175, but these are our primary sizings that we're using in most scenarios, which is 125, 75, 50, and 33. 33 being the most common. And then 50 and 75, 125 and 175, all very similar frequencies. So again, just splitting it up based on hand strength, I think is really good. And then you'll see King 6 of spades is going to mix between mostly check and bet small, which makes sense because this hand is going to be classified, I think, as like a good hand or maybe a weak hand. Let's see, King 6 of spades is a good hand. So typically good hands want to check or bet small. You don't see good hands wanting to go large unless you're already on the river, because we're not going to want to bet twice with this hand, right? We're not going to want to bet on the turn, and then if the river is a brick, we're not going to bet for value. So it makes the most sense to have a high frequency check here. And then once we get to the river, can we bet this 29% sizing? So we saw it in the Queen 7 hand earlier, but this one is really a stretch because I don't think we get ace high to call us nearly as often. And we don't get value from those weaker pairs anymore, I don't think. So this time I think I'm going to check. And we see that they had 10-7. All right, let's go through two more and then we'll wrap it up. 9-9-4, checking out of position. Interesting spot now because this is a hand where I think we have showdown value, but we do have good blockers to like check back 9x, like ace 9, and ace ace, which is a hand they're going to check back at a frequency, but I think we're just mostly going to check. We do see some bet here, and I'm not sure if that's setting up for like a river bluff or if that's trying to get very thin value, but I think it's probably the former, the setting up for river bluffs. Once we get to the river, I think it's just going to be a pure check. We just, oh, interesting. We have a small bet here, and this has to be for value because this is certainly not a good bluff, because, yeah, we're not going to get too many better hands to fold, right? They're not folding ace queen, they're not folding ace king, so this is clearly value. So I guess we're getting enough value from weak ace highs and king highs that ace jack is going to be a small bet here. This is something I am not doing also enough of. Maybe I need to look for more small bets, not using block bet enough out of position, right? That's a big leak if I'm not doing this enough because first of all, I'm missing out on value. Where's the, okay, it's gonna find it eventually. I'm missing out on value, and I'm making it more difficult for myself having to bluff catch every time I check ace high here, right? Especially when I have ace queen or ace jack, which I do. That's basically how I play ace queen or ace jack, is that I'm checking, but I'm really missing out on value when they check back ace 10, and I'm also making my life harder because I'm having to bluff catch more often out of position facing bets. Interesting. So yeah, like let's just take a quick look before the next hand at what hands villain has to call the river with versus our small bet. I think we'll just see, you know, we can filter here for king high, ace high, and we'll see villain's going to have to call all of these, these, and these. Not the lower king X ones, those are all raises, but the calling hands, here we go, are, yeah, gonna get value from these. Interesting. The no-made hands aren't very frequent. There we go. And then, of course, they are going to come up with a raise with some of these by river. Another thing I'm probably not doing enough of, finding these raises in position by the river. Yeah, it's been a while since I've gotten to nodes like these and looked in depth. So pretty cool spot on rivers. facing a bet. But then also looking at what are we going to be bluffing. So out of the big blind, when it checks all the way down, hands like 6 high, 8 high, 10 high, just a mix of all of the non-ace high combos essentially, and king high combos, queen jack. So just the bottom parts of our range for defending. Nothing like too out of line here. Yeah, interesting. Okay. And there's a hand that they may have called with, king jack. All right, last hand, out of position, king high board, going to pure check, goes check, check. Is this a hand I want to start bluffing with? We don't have any equity. We have the queen of spades, which is worse than the queen of clubs or queen of hearts for bluffing because this doesn't block king queen suited that can check back. I rolled aggressively. Maybe queen high can start bluffing here. It's kind of a leak I have for over checking in this spot, but I'm going to check this time. Yeah. The safe play is check because I know it's going to be a check, but we can have some mix of small bet there with queen 10. And we're going to check full. Okay. Yeah, interesting session. We definitely learned a bit about some spots. Using the block bet a bit more with ace high combos, very important. You know, not using overbets when we get to the river in certain spots on certain textures. Yeah, keeping those kinds of ideas in mind. I'm going to play today and hopefully find those spots that I'm making those mistakes in and fix them. So I hope you guys have been enjoying the Study Chronicles. If you have, please like and subscribe so I can continue to make more of these. I think this one was very unique, even though we're studying very similar spots. Obviously, when we do the drills, we're going to come up with different scenarios and different nodes in which the strategies are vastly different. That's kind of the beauty of poker, right? You can play the same scenario over and over again and end up with 20 different spots that you had no idea even existed. It's pretty cool. All right, guys, I will catch you on the next one.